Aloha and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Got Your Six podcast. This six-question podcast brings together high performers to share their methods, strategies, and ideas, delivered in an informative and, most importantly, actionable way that'll help you lead yourself and those around you from the battlefield to the boardroom. Coming to you every episode, I'm your host, Tony Nash. And into the breach.
Nothing mentioned on this podcast is an endorsement or opinion of the Department of Defense.
I got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. I got your six.
Sixers, what an absolute treat we have today. Jon Macaskill is here. You've probably seen him almost anywhere on LinkedIn. I know him from the Men Talking Mindfulness podcast, which he co-hosts with Will. It's just an absolute great resource for really anybody to understand the impacts of mindfulness on, not only your life, relationships, and emotions. Jon, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, Tony, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited for the conversation. I know we're going to have a lot of fun.
Absolutely. As you know, as a Sixer. So, you spent 24 years in the Navy as a Navy SEAL, commanding as a Navy SEAL. Then you get out and you go into this mindfulness journey, which is just incredible, and I know we're going to dive into throughout our conversation. But through all that, and coming from the Naval Academy, graduated in 2001, what do you constantly implement on a daily basis from that time? So over the last 22 years or so plus.
Yeah. Well, I think several of the things that we learned in the military, or at least had honed in the military. We may have learned them before, but we really had them honed in the military. I think the one actually we were discussing right before you hit record is being on time and in the right place at the right time in the right uniform. I almost missed this episode because I lost track of time, but then I looked at my calendar and boom, there it was, and I was like, okay, I got to be with Tony. Sorry, I got to break this call. I got somewhere to be. So being in the right place, in the right uniform, at the right time, that is something that you carry forward with you for your entire military career. And I think just that simple thing, it pays dividends in the military, and it pays dividends outside of the military, staying on time. But that, I think having some type of morning routine that includes some level of fitness. My morning routine is certainly not what it used to be in the SEAL teams, but it's still. I get up early, I try to get some type of workout in, and then start going about my day with the foundation of my day already set through that. And then I think respect for. We have a respect for our colleagues in the military, not necessarily or exclusively rank, but we have respect for our brothers and sisters that are serving beside us. And I think that I've carried that forward into my civilian work that I do now with my civilian brothers and sisters. So, those are the things that I've continued to implement outside of the military.
I want to touch on respect for a second, because you highlighted both respect for yourself and respect for others. Respect for your morning routine and making sure you start the day the right way, the best way that you can, because that comes through constant iteration. And then the other piece is respect for others, right? Whether you're not always the most senior person in the room, so you're showing up in the right uniform, on time, at the right place, just sets the right tone going into any conversation, discussion, meeting. And I think that's really critical. And sometimes we lose sight of that, having that respect for not only others, which is, I think, what we constantly look at, but really respect for ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's something that so many of us forget about, is respect for self and self-care. And, as a leader within a corporate organization, as a leader within the military, as a leader within your family, as a parent, we get wrapped up in taking care of those within our team. And when we do that, a lot of the time we put ourselves last, if we put ourselves anywhere, and we end up falling apart. And that's not what we should be doing as leaders. I do appreciate kind of the book, like Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last. I do appreciate that idea. But at some point you have to take care of yourself first, so that you can put your team and at the top of your priority list and take care of them. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, eventually you're going to fall apart and you're not going to be able to take care of your team. So, and that starts with respect for yourself. And it starts with something like a morning routine. Eating right, taking care of yourself physically, mentally. I also want to hit on that, taking care of yourself mentally so that you can take care of your troops, so that you can take care of your colleagues, so that you can take care of your family. You got to start with yourself.
Right, and starting with yourself really underlines that self-awareness piece, leading yourself first before you can lead others. With you talking about mindfulness so much, is there like a book or communication, a video you saw that really kind of changed the game for you when it comes to mindfulness? Or was it just a culmination of different events that happened throughout your military career that brought you to this path where you are today?
Yeah, I wish it was a book or something that I'd found early on in my career, but I actually was on various medications before I ever started meditation. I was on various medications to deal with my own anxiety and stress and some survivor guilt that I was carrying with me. And that numbed me to a point that, I kind of lost any sense of fulfillment or any sense of joy. It helped to numb the pain, but it also numbed any joy. And I still think that there's a time and place for these various medications, but I think that where I was, I didn't need them. So I looked into coming off of them, and the particular counselor that I was working with was like, well, if you're going to come off of the medication, I want you to try meditation. I want you to try mindfulness. And I laughed at him because I thought that I was kind of this guy that was too tough for that stuff, and that meditation was for weirdos, and that it was some type of weird snake oil that you had to have a lot of faith in for it to work. Well, he showed me the science behind it, the data behind it, why it works, and how it works. And once he showed me that, along with some very high-performing individuals who practice it, then I was sold. And I went and downloaded a meditation app. I started using Insight Timer, and I still use Insight Timer fairly regularly to this day. But I went home, downloaded it, and was like, okay, I'm going to jump into an hour-long meditation. And I made it about 17 seconds before my mind wandered off to whatever it was thinking about, the past, the future, my to-do list, something that I'd screwed up yesterday, whatever. And I started getting very frustrated. And I went back to that same counselor and I told him, well, this meditation stuff, it's not for me. And he asked me what I meant. Why wasn't it for me? And I told him, hey, I jumped into this hour-long meditation and I didn't make it very long before I got frustrated and I quit. He's like, well, that's like lining up at the starting line of a marathon and having never run a mile, or going into the weight room and getting under the bench press with 300 pounds on the bar without ever having lifted before. That's not what we do. And, he was speaking my language because SEALs like to work out. So I understood what he was talking about. So I went home after that and I found some much shorter meditations, like 4 and 5 minute meditations, some very simple breath work. And I did that, and I did several of those per day for several weeks until I worked my way up to like a 15-minute meditation. And by the end of 8 weeks or so, I started to see that the benefits were lasting, and they were overlapping from one meditation to the next. And not only were the benefits lasting from a meditation, I was starting to live more mindfully, and that's a big difference. Is mindfulness and meditation quite often get used synonymously, and they're not the same. There's some overlap, and they support one another and benefit one another, but they're not the same. But I was starting to live more mindfully, so being more present in the moment with my friends, my colleagues, and my family, and feeling much more of a sense of fulfillment, again, with my friends, my colleagues, and my family, and when I was alone. I mean, there was times I was just like sitting there and I was taking in the time and space that I was in and really appreciating it. And so I attribute mindfulness and meditation to changing my life for the better, and quite honestly, saving my life. But it was all through a counselor that recommended it. And not only did he recommend it, but he had enough patience with me to kind of walk me through the physiology behind it, and then introduce me to an app that I downloaded. And again, I still use to this day, but there's tons of apps out there and, different strokes for different folks. But yeah, I started with Insight Timer.
And we're going to make sure that's linked in the show notes. But what is really fascinating is, especially, coming from that kind of culture of like, I am the strongest obstacle in the way for any challenge that's going to be presented. you always kind of have to go back to putting in the reps before you can really look to take away any benefits from something. So for somebody who doesn't have any reps when it comes to meditation, what would you tell them, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 seconds? Like, what does that look like for somebody starting on a meditation journey?
Yeah. For someone who's starting, I recommend don't even call it meditation, just call it breath work, and start with something as easy as what we call box breathing. So you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, breathe out for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, and you do that 4 or 5 times. And the reason it's called box breathing, for the listeners who didn't see what I was doing there, is basically the 4 seconds of each part of it make the sides of a box. Do I still have you, Tony? I lost your.
Yeah,
okay,
we're still
I
here.
lost your video there. Okay, good. So you've got box breathing, and that can take as little as 2 minutes. Start with that and start to see the effects of it, and do that several times through a day, and then see how those effects start to overlap, and then start to do more in-depth and longer meditations. Work your way up to maybe 10 minutes, work your way up after that to another 15 minutes. But give yourself some grace. Don't try to jump into something too in-depth or of any extreme length right off the bat. Work your way up to that.
And knowing you're someone, Jon, who constantly, what you say is what you're already doing, and giving yourself some grace, is there something that you're currently working on now that you are starting as a complete beginner and a novice at?
I'm glad you asked that, man. Yes. I actually, last Monday, so not this past Monday, but the Monday before, about a week and a half ago, I just started a new job with a virtual reality and augmented reality company, working to bring the warfighter home at the end of every day. It's called 3D Media. And I have very little experience in the virtual reality world and in the augmented reality world. But they didn't bring me in because of my experience in that. They brought me in because they think that I can help them to grow, and with my leadership experience, I can help with the company inside as well. But it's just like everything else new. You're the new guy. There's a steep learning curve. They're throwing out a bunch of acronyms that are basically Greek to me, and I'm having to get comfortable being uncomfortable again, being the new guy. And I won't say at the bottom of the totem pole, because I don't feel that there is a totem pole at this company, but I definitely feel like the new guy because of my lack of knowledge. But you get comfortable being uncomfortable, and you overcome that learning curve, and then you start to grow. And it's actually a good feeling to be uncomfortable that way.
What do you do when you feel that sense of like uncomfortableness setting in, especially when you're in a new position like you are at 3D Media?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to be open and honest, and be brave enough to be vulnerable and say, you know what, I don't know what it is you're talking about. I think about it similarly to coming from the Naval Academy and going into the SEAL teams. I'm wearing my butter bar as a brand new ensign, getting to the SEAL teams after going through the training. And, you kind of think highly of yourself as an officer. And then you're like, you know what? I actually know nothing. These senior enlisted guys who've been in the teams for a while, they're the ones who know what the ground truth is. And they're the ones that I need to ask questions. But it's a little bit scary to kind of, metaphorically take those bars off as an officer and take rank off and go up to some folks and say, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing here. I need to ask a question. It's scary to be that vulnerable, but you reap the rewards from it, because now, one, you gain the respect of your colleagues and potentially your enlisted men, or for the civilian world, maybe those men and women that are below you as far as rank, but they start to see you as someone who is brave enough to admit that he doesn't know everything, but also wants to learn. And I think that's the key, is that you have that beginner's mindset or growth mindset, and you always want to learn so that you can always be a better version of yourself and for those you're leading.
Do you think having that growth mindset has really been the most impactful thing that really has proven your life, not only in the military, but now in the private sector, constantly leading other people that are much more knowledgeable in different areas that you're just trying to manage at some point throughout their career as well as your career?
Yeah, I think that's, I don't know whether it's necessarily been the most, but it's been hugely impactful. And in the military, in the private sector, in the public sector, but it's also been hugely impactful as a father. I got started late as a father. I've got 3 young kids. I've got a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 7-month-old, and I'm 44. So I got started late. And I remember before I had kids, I've got 3 older sisters and a younger brother. My 3 older sisters have kids, and I would give them advice on parenting. Without any kids, I would give them advice. And now I've got kids of my own, and I realized that, 1, that advice was unsolicited, and 2, it was most likely wrong, because you really don't know until you have kids. But now I've got kids, and I'm asking other fathers, other parents, and I'm going through a program myself to learn how to be a better parent, how to manage my emotions, how to be more present with my kids, how to be more emotionally available for them. So the beginner's mindset, that growth mindset, it applies in all walks of life, professionally, personally, corporate side, military side, family side. I think and that can greatly impact who you are and how you are as a leader, how you are and who you are as a parent. So it's very important, I think, to constantly be learning, constantly be asking questions, and constantly looking to improve.
Like you said, that growth mindset is critical. So then what is the most beneficial belief that really has impacted your life the most?
Yeah, I think it's probably tied to that growth mindset is the fact that vulnerability is not weakness. Being able to ask questions and show that you don't know everything, admit that you don't know everything. Because at some point, by acting like you know everything when you don't, you're going to mess up. You're going to mess up. And that could, at best, cause a bad day at work or cause a bad day in the family. At worst, it could cause loss of life. I mean, depending on what industry you're in or what branch of the military you're in or whatever it is that you're doing in the military, it could literally lead to the loss of life. So you've got to be brave enough to be vulnerable and ready to ask questions. But I guess, like I said, that's tied to that growth mindset and the beginner's mindset. So they're similar. There's a lot of overlap there.
Having that vulnerability and that growth mindset only can come from a place where failure has occurred. What failure has been your greatest success throughout your career life?
Wow. We could talk all day, man. I don't know that I necessarily have one that jumps to mind right off the bat, but I can tell you one of them in high school. I applied to get into the Naval Academy and got denied. And, I remember the letter coming in the mail and saying, hey, you didn't get in because you didn't have the grades in X, Y, and Z, because you don't have the well-roundedness, because you haven't been involved in enough extracurricular activities. And I was like, okay, all right, well, I'm going to go ahead and enlist in the Navy. So I enlisted first before I ever went to the Naval Academy. And while I was enlisted, I worked to get my grades up. I did some schooling on my own and got schooled up on calculus and beefed up on some physics and chemistry, and then got involved in some of the extracurricular activities that you can as an enlisted sailor, and then reapplied from the enlisted ranks and ended up getting a Secretary of the Navy nomination and appointment to the Naval Academy. And I think that was a big one. But at first, when I got that letter, I was
crushed,
beat down. Yeah, I was crushed, man. I was like, okay, I'm not as good as I thought I was. I'm just gonna hide in my turtle shell and never come out. And I could have very easily done that, and many people do. But I was, I think, trained by I ran track and cross country, and my coach didn't really ever accept failure, didn't accept poor work ethic. My father and my parents were the same way. So I think that helped me out a lot. But there were many, many other failures along the way that I learned a tremendous amount from. And I believe that every one of those literal and figurative scars that I have from my life, I've become better for it.
So you close with, allowing that failure to make you better. So then I'll have to ask you as we kind of close out our time here, Jon Macaskill, how are you better than yesterday?
Yeah, well, I think I'm more emotionally available. I'm more aware of my own personal needs. I'm much more fulfilled in my life today than I was 10 years ago or even 6 years ago, because I am present. I am in the moment. And I have learned what not being present and in the moment can do for you. It can cause undue anxiety when you worry too much about the future. I mean, thinking about and planning for the future is one thing, but continually worrying about it, that causes a significant level of undue anxiety. Stewing about the past, ruminating over it, that causes significant amount of depression. But when you're in the moment, present, like I'm present with you right here, Tony, and I'm appreciating this conversation. And that gives me a sense of joy and fulfillment. When I go home later this evening and I'm with my kids, I'm going to be present and in the moment. And that's all you get. You only get this present moment. The future doesn't exist yet. The past is gone. There's nothing you can do about it except learn from it. But other than that, man, I think I'm happier, healthier, and more fulfilled. And I'm a better husband, father, and man because of it.
You just wrapped it up beautifully. Jon, I can't thank you enough for your time. Where can people connect with you when they want to reach out, other than, Men Talking Mindfulness podcast?
Yeah, well, hey, thanks for that plug. Yeah, definitely check out the Men Talking Mindfulness podcast. We think it's great.
It is.
Some of our audience
as a listener, absolutely.
Yeah. And then you can find me on LinkedIn, Jon Macaskill, Jon, last name is Macaskill, and I'm sure Tony will have that in the notes. I'm on LinkedIn primarily, but I am on Instagram as well as Mindful Frogman is my Instagram name. And then you can just look me up on jonmacaskill.com. That's my personal website.
And just be mindful. See, I had to get it just a little bit in there of what Jon's working on in the AR, VR space, because it is absolutely incredible. If you want to just kind of talk about that real quick.
Yeah, I'd love to, man. Thanks for this opportunity. So again, the AR and VR work that I'm doing with 3D Media, the mission is to bring the warfighter home at the end of every day, safely. And that includes, everything physically safely, and eventually we're going to be doing some of the mental health side of things with VR and AR. And I think there's a tremendous amount of work to be done there to bring the warfighter and the worker. We're branching outside of DoD to bring VR and AR to healthcare workers, law enforcement, first responders, teachers, education. So there's tons of need out there for what we're doing in the VR and AR space, and in ways that you wouldn't traditionally imagine VR or AR being used. So it's an exciting field, and I'm very happy to be a part of the 3D Media team.
Yeah, awesome, Jon. Thank you so much for your time, sharing your story, your failures, your successes, but also continue not only to serve others, but serve yourself by making sure you respect everything that you're doing and being present in the moment. Jon, thank you so much for having our six. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tony. I appreciate it. Great show.
I don't know what you've been told, Sixers, but the lawyers would like us to remind you that the views, opinions, and comments expressed on the Got Your Six podcast are solely those of the hosts or guests, to include current and previous Department of Defense employees, and should in no way be considered the opinions of or endorsements on behalf of the Department of Defense or any of its components, divisions, contractors, or other current and previous staff members.